It began the way real memories begin, not with big announcements but with small details that stay with you. The red carpet glowed under warm golden lights, cameras flashed in soft bursts, and Sandra and Keanu stepped into the moment with the kind of quiet comfort that comes from years of understanding each other's rhythm. They weren't performing, not tonight. They were simply enjoying the space, two friends sharing a rare pause in a world that never stopped moving. Sandra laughed at something Keanu whispered, her shoulders loosening as the crowd's pressure faded just enough for her to breathe naturally. Keanu wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't even aware of how many eyes were watching. He just wanted Sandra to feel grounded in a place that often overwhelmed her. His small gestures, adjusting the angle so she wasn't blinded by lights, subtly slowing his pace so she never felt rushed, created an atmosphere that felt more human than glamorous. Reporters called their names from all angles, but the two moved with an easy kind of grace, greeting people with warmth while staying close to each other in a quiet, protective way. Sandra felt calmer than she had in days, and she knew it was because Keanu had a way of turning noise into background, making her feel seen without being pushed into the spotlight. They paused in front of a cluster of photographers, and Sandra lifted her chin with confidence she didn't even realize she still had in her. Keanu glanced at her with a small smile, the kind that said you're doing great without needing words. It wasn't romantic, it was deeper than that. It was trust. It was history. It was knowing how to be there for someone without stepping on their light. But beneath all that warmth, Sandra carried a small tension she hadn't mentioned. Big events always made her feel like she was being compared to other actresses, to past versions of herself, to expectations she could never fully meet. Keanu sensed something underneath her smile, something wavering, but before he could ask, a new wave of lights flashed from the far end of the carpet. The crowd shifted. A sudden murmur rippled through the reporters. Heads turned. Cameras aimed in one direction as if drawn by a magnetic pull. Sandra felt the shift first. Keanu noticed it a second later. At the far side of the carpet, stepping out of a sleek black car with confident grace, Alexandra Grant had arrived. The photographers erupted in louder flashes, voices rising with surprise and curiosity. Sandra's breath caught unexpectedly, not in jealousy, not in insecurity, but in the sudden realization that this night, once so calm, had changed its rhythm entirely. Keanu turned his head, expression unreadable for a brief second. And in that fragile pause, Sandra wondered what this moment was about to become. Sandra felt the energy on the carpet change instantly, as if someone had quietly dimmed the warmth in the atmosphere. The reporters' voices sharpened, the cameras tilted, and half the crowd leaned toward Alexandra with unmistakable interest. It wasn't dramatic or hostile, just sudden, unexpected, and a reminder of how quickly attention could shift in this world. Keanu straightened slightly beside her, not in alarm, in awareness. He knew this rhythm too well. A calm evening could turn into a storm without anyone doing anything wrong. He glanced at Sandra, noticing the slight stiffness in her posture, the tiny pause in her breath. She tried to hide it, but Keanu understood her more deeply than she realized. "Hey," he murmured softly, just enough for her to hear. "Stay with me." Sandra nodded, offering a polite smile, but inside she felt the old discomfort rising, the one that whispered she wasn't enough, that she'd be overshadowed, that she didn't belong in this spotlight anymore. She hated that feeling, not because of Alexandra, but because fame had a way of making even the strongest hearts feel replaceable. Alexandra moved with her usual elegant confidence, waving kindly at fans, photographers calling her name from every direction. There was nothing threatening in her presence. Still, the emotional shift inside Sandra wasn't about competition, it was about timing. This night had been gentle, simple, almost healing, until now. Keanu noticed her silence and stepped a little closer, narrowing the space between them. He didn't put an arm around her or draw attention. He simply adjusted his position so she felt anchored again. It was subtle, but Sandra felt it immediately. One of the photographers shouted, "Keanu, Sandra, look this way." Another called, "Alexandra is here, Keanu over here." Sandra's breath tightened. She didn't want to pull away from the moment she and Keanu were sharing, but she also didn't want to stand in the path of something she didn't fully understand. Keanu leaned toward her, voice low and steady. You all right? Sandra met his eyes. For a second, the noise faded. He wasn't asking for the camera. He wasn't asking for the crowd. He was asking for her. I'm okay, she answered softly, though part of her wasn't sure. The reporters kept shouting, calling names, trying to pull attention in different directions. The carpet felt suddenly narrower, crowded, overwhelming. Sandra touched the side of her dress absent-mindedly, grounding herself. Keanu saw the gesture and shifted his stance again, intentionally angling his body as if creating a small shelter around her from the noise. But the moment didn't break, it twisted. A reporter's voice rose above the rest. Keanu, Alexandra just arrived. Will you take photos together? Sandra froze. The question wasn't rude. It was normal, expected, professional. But for Sandra, it struck a quiet, vulnerable nerve. Keanu turned instinctively toward the sound. The reporters waited, cameras poised, hungry for a reaction. And Sandra stood beside him, unsure whether this was the moment she needed to step back. Or the moment everything between the three of them would shift in a way she wasn't ready for. The air held its breath. And so did Sandra. Sandra felt the world slow around her as the reporter's question hung in the air. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't personal, but it cut through the moment with a sharp edge she wasn't prepared for. The flashes intensified, each one making her heartbeat louder in her ears. For a brief second, she wondered if stepping aside would be easier, quieter, safer. But Keanu reacted before she could move. He didn't flinch. He didn't shift away from her. Instead, he turned calmly toward the noise, his expression composed but unmistakably firm, as though he'd been expecting this kind of moment and refused to let it control the night. Sandra watched him with a mix of relief and confusion as he held up a gentle hand, signaling the reporters to slow down. The crowd quieted, not completely, but enough to shift from chaos to curiosity. Keanu spoke clearly with warmth but unmistakable intention. We'll get there, he said, but right now we're finishing these shots. Sandra blinked. Finishing these shots. With her. It wasn't a dramatic declaration, but its meaning landed in her chest with surprising force. He wasn't dismissing Alexandra. He wasn't creating sides. He was simply choosing to honor the moment he and Sandra were already in, rather than allowing the world to pull them apart. Sandra tried to hide the way her shoulders relaxed, but Keanu noticed. He always noticed. The photographers hesitated, unsure whether to push the moment further or respect the boundary. Some stepped back. Others adjusted their angles. The tension eased just enough for Sandra to breathe again. Keanu leaned slightly toward her, voice soft, steady. You okay? She nodded, but her voice was more fragile than she expected. I just didn't want it to get awkward. It won't, he said, not as reassurance, but as certainty. They turned back toward the cameras. Sandra found her place beside him again, slipping into a genuine smile as Keanu subtly mirrored her posture, grounding her without pulling attention. For a few seconds, the world seemed to settle, as if reminding her that sometimes stability comes from the person beside you, not the circumstances around you. But then, almost on cue, another flash of light erupted from the far corner of the carpet. Sandra saw the movement first. Alexandra had finally begun walking toward them, gracefully weaving through the crowd. She wasn't in a rush. She wasn't interrupting. She wasn't even focused on the reporters. Her eyes were on Keanu and Sandra. Sandra's breath caught not out of jealousy, not fear, but an unexpected and complicated mix of uncertainty and empathy. Alexandra didn't look tense at all. She looked thoughtful, and that only deepened the knot forming inside Sandra's chest. Keanu turned slightly, sensing the shift in Sandra's breathing before he even saw Alexandra approaching. He didn't step away, but he didn't step forward either, holding his place beside Sandra with quiet resolve. The crowd noticed the three trajectories converging. Cameras lifted. Whispers rippled. Flashes intensified. Sandra felt the moment stretch thin, as if the next few seconds would decide how the rest of the night would unfold. Alexandra stopped just a few steps away. She smiled, not wide, not tense, but gently, and her first words were completely unexpected. "Hi, Sandra," she said softly. "You look truly beautiful tonight." The kindness hit Sandra harder than any spotlight. And suddenly nothing about the night felt simple anymore. Sandra hadn't expected warmth. She hadn't expected softness. She certainly hadn't expected Alexandra's first words to be directed not at Keanu, not at the cameras, but at her. For a moment, Sandra forgot about the noise, the lights, the crowd pressing in. All she felt was the sincerity in Alexandra's voice, gentle, calm, unforced. "Thank you," Sandra managed, though her voice trembled slightly. She wasn't unsure of Alexandra, she was unsure of herself. She had come prepared for polite distance, maybe a touch of professional awkwardness, but not for this. Keanu's eyes flicked between them, sensing the emotional shift like a change in temperature. He had expected tension. He knew Sandra carried anxiety into situations like these. But what he saw now was something more complex, something tender settling beneath the surface. Alexandra moved closer by just a step, enough to feel present but not imposing. "I saw you two from across the carpet," she said. "You looked like you were actually enjoying yourselves. That's rare out here." Sandra let out a soft laugh, surprised by how much the comment disarmed her. "We were trying," she said. "Well," Alexandra smiled, "it showed." The photographers captured the moment, not tension, not rivalry, but a quiet connection forming where none was expected. The crowd didn't quite know what to make of it, but the energy shifted palpably. Sandra could breathe again, not because the situation became easier, but because someone extended a hand instead of taking a step away. Keanu sensed the opening and lightly placed a hand at Sandra's back, not to claim space, but to steady her. The gesture wasn't for the cameras, it was for her peace of mind. She felt the warmth of it spread through her ribs like a quiet reassurance. A reporter, noticing the gentler dynamic, called out, "Keanu, Sandra, Alexandra, can we get a group shot?" Sandra stiffened, the tension creeping back in, but Alexandra reacted first. Only instead of stepping toward Keanu, she turned to Sandra and said gently, "Are you okay with that? We don't have to do it if you're not comfortable." The question broke something open inside Sandra, something fragile, something old. People rarely asked her that in these situations. People assumed, people moved, people expected, but Alexandra asked. Sandra lifted her eyes, meeting Alexandra's sincerity head-on. "Yes, I'm okay," she said, and she meant it. Keanu nodded approvingly, understanding exactly what had shifted. Not a rivalry, not a triangle, not drama. Respect. Between all three of them. They stepped closer for the shot, the cameras capturing the unexpected harmony, Keanu in the center, Sandra on one side, Alexandra on the other. And in that single frame, no one looked pushed aside. No one looked overshadowed. Instead, the moment felt strangely complete, like a story people tell because of how surprisingly human it was. But as the flashes went off, Sandra felt something brush inside her. Not jealousy, not fear, but a quiet question she couldn't yet name. Something about Alexandra's kindness, Keanu's presence, and her own emotional unraveling over the past hour created a knot that hadn't loosened yet. A knot that made her realize she wasn't done feeling the impact of this night. And when the last flash faded and the three of them stepped away from the line of photographers, Sandra found herself wondering. What part of her was still afraid, and why? Keanu noticed her silence as they walked off the carpet. He slowed down. Then he gently spoke the words she wasn't ready to admit she needed. "Sandra, what's really going on inside you right now?" Sandra felt the question land softly but deeply, like Keanu had placed it directly on the part of her she'd been trying to ignore. The crowd noise faded behind them as they walked farther from the lights. The red carpet shimmered underfoot, but her thoughts were somewhere else entirely, twisted between gratitude, confusion, and an unexpected ache she didn't yet understand. Keanu slowed his pace, giving her enough space to breathe, but not enough to disappear into her thoughts alone. He'd always been good at that, offering room without creating distance. "I'm not sure," Sandra finally said, her voice quiet but raw. "Tonight just surprised me." Keanu waited. He didn't rush her, didn't try to finish her sentences. He simply gave her the safety to speak in her own time. Sandra drew a deeper breath. "I didn't expect to feel insecure," she admitted, the word tasting unfamiliar in her mouth. "I thought I was past that, and then everything shifted the second Alexandra arrived. Not because she did anything wrong, she didn't, but because I felt myself fade for a moment." Keanu's expression softened with understanding, not pity. "You didn't fade," he said gently. "You stepped back because you care too much about how the world reads moments like these, but the people who matter, they don't see you that way." Sandra blinked, surprised by the firmness in his voice. "It's not jealousy," she whispered. "It's fear, fear of being irrelevant, fear of being compared, fear that maybe I'm not as steady as I pretend to be." Keanu nodded. "That's not weakness, Sandra, that's honesty." She let out a shaky laugh. Funny how honesty feels more terrifying than the cameras. His small smile told her he understood more than she knew. They reached a quieter section of the event venue, where soft music drifted through the night, and the noise of reporters was only a faint echo. Alexandra lingered at a respectful distance, greeting a few guests, giving Sandra and Keanu space without being asked. Sandra noticed her glancing over occasionally, not to intrude, but to check if things were okay. And that kindness only deepened the complication inside Sandra's chest. "I didn't expect her to be so gentle," Sandra admitted. Keanu followed her gaze. "She's a good person and she respects you." Sandra swallowed. "I could feel that, and that almost made me feel worse because I wasn't sure if I deserved it." Keanu stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice. "Sandra, you deserve kindness simply because of who you are, not because of what you fear people might think." For the first time that night, her breath steadied. The vulnerability she'd been carrying began to loosen, though not completely. There was still one truth she hadn't dared say. "And there's something else," she whispered. Keanu waited, patient, steady, anchored. Sandra hesitated, then continued, her voice fragile but courageous. "I didn't realize how much I rely on you emotionally, not romantically, just—" She placed a hand on her chest. "Here, you make me feel visible, safe, like I can be myself without having to compete with the world." Keanu's eyes softened with a depth she rarely saw. He didn't step away. He didn't make light of it. He let the weight of her words settle between them with respect. "That's not a burden," he said quietly. "That's an honor." Sandra's throat tightened. She hadn't expected that answer. She hadn't expected him to meet her vulnerability with equal vulnerability. Before she could respond, Alexandra approached, slowly, careful, observant, reading the moment with the same quiet empathy she'd shown earlier. "Everything okay?" she asked gently, looking at Sandra first, not Keanu. Sandra wiped a small, unexpected tear near her eye and nodded. "Yeah, actually, yes." Alexandra smiled, warm, sincere, unthreatening. "Good, because you both looked like you needed a moment." Keanu let out a soft laugh, and Sandra found herself smiling too. The tension that had once knotted inside her felt lighter now, not gone, but transformed. And then Alexandra added something that neither of them expected. "You two have a beautiful energy together. I hope you know that." Sandra felt her chest warm at the words, not with confusion this time, but with clarity. Keanu looked at Sandra, then at Alexandra, and something unspoken passed between the three of them. Something that said, this wasn't a moment of division. It was a moment of understanding. But the night wasn't over yet. And the most surprising emotional turn was still waiting just ahead. The music inside the venue softened into a slow, warm hum as the three of them stepped off the red carpet and into the quieter glow of the reception hall. The chaos was gone, replaced with dim lights, gentle conversation, and an atmosphere that finally allowed everyone to breathe. Sandra felt herself relax in a way she hadn't since the evening began, though a trace of emotional exhaustion still clung to her heartbeat. Keanu stayed close, not protectively this time, but naturally, like they were finding their rhythm again after being pulled into the storm of attention. Alexandra walked beside them with a calm pace, observant without intruding, offering space without stepping away. It was strange, Sandra thought, how someone's presence could shift from intimidating to grounding in such a short span. They stopped near a quiet corner of the hall, a small table lit with soft amber light. For the first time, the three of them stood without cameras, without whispers, without the pressure of expectation. Just three people who had unexpectedly collided in a moment none of them planned. Alexandra turned to Sandra with a gentle expression. "I meant what I said earlier," she said. "You really did look beautiful tonight, and strong, even when you didn't feel it." Sandra blinked, caught off guard by how deeply the words struck her. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "I wasn't feeling very strong." Alexandra smiled knowingly. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just staying present when everything inside you wants to run. Sandra exhaled slowly, realizing the truth in that. Maybe she had been stronger than she gave herself credit for. Maybe this night didn't expose her insecurities. Maybe it exposed her growth. Keanu watched the exchange with quiet warmth. He admired Sandra's vulnerability, her courage to confront emotions she usually kept hidden, and Alexandra's instinct to respond with kindness rather than competition. He felt a strange sense of gratitude for the moment, not because it was comfortable, but because it was real. Sandra finally spoke, voice steady. "I thought I would feel overshadowed tonight, but instead I feel like I was seen by both of you." Alexandra's eyes softened, "Because you were." The words wrapped around Sandra like a gentle embrace she didn't know she needed. She looked at Keanu, and he gave her a soft nod, the kind that told her he had been seeing her clearly long before tonight. For a moment, the three stood in a peaceful silence that held more meaning than any applause outside. It wasn't the fame, the flashbulbs, or the red carpet that made the moment powerful. It was the honesty, the human connection, the unexpected harmony. Then Keanu spoke, simple, genuine, heartfelt. "I think tonight showed something important," he said. "That kindness can change the whole direction of a moment if someone chooses it." Alexandra smiled, and we all chose it. Sandra felt tears well at the edges of her eyes, not from sadness, not from insecurity, but from the overwhelming relief of feeling understood. She didn't hide them. For the first time that night, she allowed the emotion to reach the surface. "I didn't realize how much I needed this," she whispered. Keanu gently placed his hand over hers. "We needed it too." Alexandra nodded, "All of us." There was no rivalry, no silent competition, no tension left to untangle. Just three people who had faced an unexpected twist on a glamorous night, and walked out of it with more compassion than they entered with. Sandra looked at them both, feeling something inside her settle, something that had been restless for a long time. She wasn't overshadowed. She wasn't compared. She wasn't replaced. She was part of a moment where everyone chose grace. Keanu squeezed her hand once, grounding her. "Ready to go enjoy the rest of the night?" he asked. Sandra smiled, full and genuine. "Yeah, I think I finally am." Alexandra stepped closer and looped her arm gently with Sandra's, a gesture of solidarity, not performance. "Then let's walk together," she said warmly. The three of them moved forward into the reception hall, side by side, not as fractured pieces of a complicated narrative, but as people who found connection where conflict could have lived. And as they disappeared into the soft, golden light, Sandra realized the truth she would carry long after the night was over. Some moments surprise you. Some moments challenge you. But the rarest ones heal you in ways you never expected. This night healed her. The end with warmth, humanity, and quiet emotional triumph. The reception hall glowed softly, filled with muted laughter and warm conversations, but something about the air around Sandra, Keanu, and Alexandra felt different, quieter, more intentional. They walked together through the room, the lights reflecting gently off polished floors, and for the first time that evening, Sandra felt no tension pulling at her chest. She wasn't shrinking from the world anymore. She wasn't bracing herself. She was simply there, present, steady, open. They found a small balcony just beyond the main hall, a peaceful retreat overlooking the city. Cool night air drifted in, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the soft sparkle of lights stretching across the horizon. Sandra stepped forward, resting her hands on the railing, letting the breeze cool her still warm cheeks. Keanu stood beside her, relaxed, hands tucked gently into his pockets. Alexandra lingered a moment before joining them, giving the space time to breathe. For a while, no one spoke. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty, it was full. Full of everything that had been felt, confronted, and quietly resolved. Sandra finally broke the stillness with a small laugh. I don't think I've ever survived a red carpet with this many emotions. Keanu chuckled softly. You handled it better than you think. Alexandra smiled, much better than most people would. Sandra exhaled a long, deep breath. I just didn't expect to feel anything tonight beyond show up, smile, leave. Sometimes, Alexandra said, leaning on the railing beside her, the nights we think will be simple end up teaching us the most. Sandra looked at her, really looked at her, and realized how wrong her assumptions had been. Alexandra wasn't here to compete with her. She wasn't here to outshine anyone. She was simply another person navigating the same unpredictable world of attention, expectations, and fragile emotions. I misjudged the moment when you arrived, Sandra admitted gently. I felt something twist inside me and I thought it meant something about you, but it was about me. Alexandra's eyes softened. We all have those moments. Keanu watched them quietly, pride in his expression. He'd always believed people could surprise each other if given the space and kindness to do so. Sandra continued, I'm glad you came over. Your kindness tonight, it changed something for me. It changed something for me too, Alexandra replied. You're not someone I want to be compared to, you're someone I want to stand beside. Sandra felt warmth bloom in her chest, unexpected, sincere, and healing. Keanu stepped closer, his voice low and earnest. For what it's worth, you two handled tonight with more grace than the photographers deserved. They all laughed softly, the tension completely dissolved. Then Keanu added something that stayed with Sandra long after the words were spoken. You both reminded me tonight why humility matters. Fame doesn't teach that, people do. Sandra smiled at him, grateful in ways she couldn't fully express. Keanu had always been the steady one, not because he tried to be, but because he chose to be. As the three of them stood on the balcony, watching the city breathe beneath them, Sandra felt a quiet truth unfold. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of being overshadowed. Not of being compared. Not of losing her place in a moment. Tonight had shown her something she hadn't expected to rediscover, her own emotional resilience. Alexandra touched her arm lightly. Sandra, whatever story the world tries to write about tonight, just remember this part, the real part, the part only we know. Sandra nodded slowly. I will. Keanu placed a comforting hand on her back, steady and warm. Good, because this was a good night, Sandra, a real one. They stayed a little longer, letting the night settle around them, letting gratitude replace every trace of insecurity. Then, together, not divided, not competing, not compared, they returned to the glowing hall, ready to enjoy the rest of the evening as three people who understood each other better than before. And as Sandra walked between Keanu and Alexandra, she felt a newfound ease wash through her. Sometimes the most unexpected arrivals bring the most unexpected healing. The evening drifted toward its final hour with a softness Sandra did not expect. Conversations mellowed, the music slowed, and the glow of chandeliers painted gentle circles on the floor. The earlier chaos of the red carpet felt distant now, as if it had happened to different versions of themselves, younger and more unsure. Sandra found herself at a small table with Keanu and Alexandra, sipping sparkling water while guests mingled around them. It was peaceful, almost intimate, and she realized something surprising. She felt no pressure to perform, no need to hide her emotions, no instinct to compare herself to anyone in the room. She felt present. She felt accepted. She felt whole. Alexandra leaned back in her chair, watching the crowd with calm eyes. Funny, isn't it? She said. How a moment that starts with tension can end with connection. Sandra smiled. I think sometimes the universe tests us just to show us what we're capable of. Keanu raised an eyebrow in quiet agreement, or to show us who we have around us. The sentiment lingered between them, rich and warming. As the night wound down, a gentle announcement echoed through the hall, thanking the guests for attending. People began collecting their coats and saying their goodbyes. Sandra stood slowly, feeling the tiredness in her legs but also the grounding comfort in her chest. Alexandra stepped forward and hugged her, not a polite, staged hug, but a warm and human one. Sandra froze for half a second before melting into the gesture, returning it fully. You handled yourself beautifully tonight, Alexandra whispered before pulling back. Don't forget that. I won't, Sandra said, and this time she truly believed it. Keanu watched them with a soft smile before giving Sandra a hug of his own. His arms wrapped around her gently, reassuringly, like someone who knew her emotional weight and wanted to carry part of it. Proud of you, he murmured. The words settled into her bones, deeper than she expected. When they stepped outside, the cool night air greeted them with a refreshing clarity. Cars lined up along the curb as guests departed, but the three of them lingered on the steps, unwilling to break the delicate bond the night had crafted. Alexandra turned to Keanu with a playful smirk. You two looked like you were having too much fun without me. Sandra laughed. We were, until the universe decided to add a plot twist. Keanu shook his head. It wasn't a twist, it was timing. Alexandra smiled knowingly. Good timing. Sandra felt something shift inside her, not discomfort, not confusion, but peace. A resolution she hadn't expected to find tonight. She looked at both of them and said softly, Thank you for tonight, for everything. Alexandra squeezed her hand. Tonight was better because you were part of it. Keanu nodded. We wouldn't have wanted it any other way. The cars pulled up. Alexandra was the first to leave, offering a final wave before slipping inside. Sandra watched her go, no trace of the earlier tension remaining, only respect, only warmth. Keanu waited with Sandra until her car arrived. They stood in a comfortable silence, the kind that happens only when everything that needed to be said had already been spoken. As Sandra's car door opened, she turned back to Keanu. Do you think nights like this happen for a reason? She asked. Keanu considered it for a moment. Yeah, he said quietly. I think they show us who we really are and who we're becoming. Sandra held his gaze, letting his words settle into a place she hadn't touched in a long time. Then I'm glad tonight happened. So am I, Keanu said. She stepped into the car, but before the door closed, Keanu added gently, Get some rest. You've had a big night. Sandra smiled, not the practiced Hollywood smile, but a real one. Good night, Keanu. Good night, Sandra. As her car pulled away, Sandra looked out the window at the city lights shimmering like gentle reminders of everything she felt tonight. Fear, vulnerability, kindness, connection, and unexpected healing. Her heart was full, her spirit steadier, her confidence reclaimed. And as she finally exhaled, letting the night dissolve into memory, she realized something powerful. She hadn't been overshadowed at all. She had been seen by others, and finally by herself. The night didn't break her. The night rebuilt her.